should be designed. But someone who's passionately curious would question whether or not the design of the elevator is optimal, right? Does it make sense for it to take so much space of a building for me to go up an elevator? What is a better way or mechanism by which I can reach the top of a building or whichever floor I want to go to without taking as much space? And so a great example of someone who's passionately curious is Elon Musk. He's a fellow Wharton alum, and he asked the question when he was here in like the early 90s. As a student, he said, what are the 3 things that would most impact humanity during my lifetime? Great question to ask. And passionate curiosity is all about asking the right questions. And he said the 3 things that would most impact humanity would be 1, the internet, 2, alternative energy, and 3, multiplanetary living. He thought it didn't make sense for us to be dependent on one planet. Very big thinker, right? So he built PayPal, and which was online payments, which helped power the internet. He then built Solar City and Tesla for alternative energy, and then he built SpaceX to allow people to go back and forth between here and Mars, and that's the vision of what he's come to. So clearly, one of the greatest inventors and innovators of our time. And one thing that he realized, though, is that whenever you come up with an invention, it's great to be curious and ask the right question and come up with great ideas, but there's a whole process by which you go to market and implement whatever you're doing. So he came up with the idea of Tesla. Tesla was like, okay, right now, the problem with energy is that we have all these cars going off, and they're burning all this fuel, and it's not good for a couple reasons. One is there's a limited amount of fuel, and second, obviously, it's not good for the environment. So he's like, if we can have power electric cars, then we can completely reduce the amount of gas we're consuming and the impact on the environment. So what he did was, the first thing he had to do was figure out how he could design a battery that's going to power a car, and that was a huge innovation that he was able to come up with. But he didn't just be like, oh, I'm going to build this product and it's going to be, like, you need to bring it to the world, right? And the car has to be adopted around the world. And it's very hard to do that on your first product. So the first thing he did was he sold the car for $100,000, first version of the product, and obviously not that many people can afford a car at $100,000, right? So he was targeting the inventors, the innovators, the early adopters, and he's like, look, it's not going to be a perfect product, like this is our first version, but it's a revolutionary product, right? And they have all these superchargers because you have to charge the car around California, and he started selling the car. And then the second version, that's his first kind of launch. A few years later, he launched the second version of the Tesla, $50,000 car, and then that is like a little more people can now, it's a little more affordable, it's better, it's optimized. And now the next version of the car he's going to launch is going to be a $30,000 car, and it's going to be mass market. So you see how he's bringing a product to the market. It's an amazing invention, an amazing innovation of, this is a new way in which you design a vehicle and a new way in which you design a battery. But then the whole go-to-market strategy is very important for the success of the product. Now, I think passionate curiosity is the key to education, because at the end of the day, if education is all about providing people with content that you can access, the problem is that, first of all, the existing knowledge is going to innovate, you're going to have to first have a very strong understanding of the existing knowledge, right? So Elon needed to know how batteries currently work to be able to improve the battery. He needed to know how rockets currently work for him to innovate and build a better rocket. But at the end of the day, the questions that he was asking was what allowed him to change and think a lot bigger than the kind of traditional way in which we think is like, let's know everything that there is to know, or let's kind of understand how things currently work. And that, I think, is where the next step in education, it's like, how do we help people, how do we trigger and get them intrigued with how the world works and how the world functions, as opposed to them accepting the way the world currently works? Let's think about how we change that. Steve Jobs is famous for the quote of like, we grow up, he says we grow up and we think that we live our lives in a very structured way. You're born, you go to school, you go to college, you then get a job, and then you retire. It's kind of very structured, and there's limited amounts of flexibility that you can have. And he's like, but when you realize one thing, that whatever we call life, this entire structure was designed and developed by people. That people are no different from you and me and everyone else in the world. And when you realize that, then you can realize, wait, I can change things. I can make things differently. And that's kind of, and then you start to ask questions about, wait a second, does it make sense for things to work in this way? Does it make sense that when I go to a hospital, the way in which I'm treated and the way in which I'm served, is that the best way that the hospital, which is the key value out of the hospital is to provide patient care, is there a better way for them to provide that service? And you start to ask smart questions about it. So I really think asking questions is very important. And I'll give you an example of an interesting question that will tie into my second topic. So Google obviously is a huge search engine, and they've captured a lot of the developed world. And the key step for them to grow is to capture a lot of the developing world. And they want people to search, right? So the problem, though, is that you need to have good internet to search. And it's very hard for people in rural areas in India and Africa to access the internet at reasonable speeds so they can search on Google. And so Google's like, okay, how do we come up with a smart way in which we can provide internet access to people in remote areas? And so, the current ways in which you provide internet requires a decent amount of infrastructure, so we have to come up with a smart way that works in these areas where there isn't the right amount of infrastructure that we currently have in these developed world. So what did they do? They came up with this idea of a balloon that you can because then it's easy you get these helicopters, they just drop these balloons. These balloons will then provide Wi-Fi to these people in remote areas, and now they can access the internet and they can search on Google. Great idea. Now the problem, though, is how do you decide whether or not this makes sense for Google to invest in, right? How much does it cost to get these helicopters, to drop these balloons? They're going to have to go through a bunch of testing, hire a bunch of mountaineers to go up and take these balloons down, and it's going to take a lot of time to get this thing out. So that is a managerial decision. Okay, and that's the second thing I want to talk about, is how to make managerial decisions on large, risky projects where you're investing a lot of time and the returns are going to be long-term, right? It's not going to be just like tomorrow we suddenly have balloons all over Africa and everyone has internet and everyone's searching on Google. So the way they can come up with the decision, the way they make the decision is they kind of have a two-step process. The first step is, does this idea make sense? And if so, let's put a bit of money into it and let's start experimenting. We're not going to invest a ton of money. No one's going to be working full-time on it. We're going to have a bunch of people part-time on it, and we're going to start experimenting. And then as we see more and more potential, we'll then move it to a next level of decision-making where there's a much bigger restriction and there's a much bigger investment of time, money. People are going to start working full-time. And so the way they made the decision of whether or not they're going to invest in this project is they have those two steps. First, you kind of have a low threshold at the beginning because you really need a lot of experimentation before you realize the potential of a project, and then when you start experimenting, you can then figure out whether or not you're going to make a bigger investment. And so that's kind of how they make the decision. And the reason they do that is, I don't know how many people have taken Adam Grant's class. Adam Grant calls it escalation of commitment. And what that means is that if you start having all these people working full-time on a specific project early on and you invest a lot of time and energy, it becomes, you kind of escalate your commitment, which means that you basically are like, okay, I just invested, 1 year of my time. I put 5 people on it. I invested X million dollars. It's much harder for you to cut the cord and turn down a project that's not working. And then you have all these people who are working full time on this project. Do you fire them? What do you do with them? So there's all these other consequences of how you. So these decisions are not just are a little more complicated than they seem on the surface. And so that's the way Google came about kind of making that decision. And it's basically a decision about how do you kind of think about risky projects. And then that's a managerial standpoint. On a personal standpoint, you also make, as an individual, a lot of risky decisions, right? So or decisions that are important. So you'd make a decision over which job to take, right? And I'm sure a lot of you guys in the next couple of years are going to be making a decision on which job to take. And so I'll talk a bit about myself and how I kind of went about that. So I worked at a statistics company, a company that builds statistical software, and the software is mainly used by statisticians and derivative traders, financial analysts. And then I worked at a startup founded by Penn alums that has done very, very well, called Ampush. And what they do is they build they basically run marketing for companies. So they'll build software analytics to help you optimize the way in which you advertise on Google, the way in which you advertise on Facebook, the whole creative part, the image, the text, how do you kind of design that. And then I went into tech investing. I worked at a company called Silver Lake Partners. They invest in large technology companies. And it was a great experience, great people. It's a private equity job, which according to Wharton is amazing, right? And then it was a great time, very talented people. And I kind of had the decision of do I stay with? I started working at VenturePact on the side with my co-founder, and I had to make a decision. Do I go with Silver Lake, which according to the standard way in which you think of life and the way in which the standard structure, you say oh, that's perfect, right? Because you go to the rule is you go to, you come to Wharton, you go to banking, then you go to private equity, and you get a great job, and you're happy. That's and so I had reached that point of where everyone is wow, you reached that point of whatever success as you will. And then my alternative was do VenturePact, which is me and my and a friend from Penn, and we're just saying oh, we are gonna work on this thing. And everyone was oh, this is obvious, right? But then I knew that inside myself there was this feeling of this pull towards VenturePact. The reason was that I had worked at startups, I had invested in startups, and my co-founder had done the same. And we both realized that software was very challenging for companies. It was very hard for companies that came across a technical challenge or a technical problem to address that problem. Mainly because the supply of technical talent within a 50-mile radius of your office did not meet the demand. And therefore, they had this problem where everyone we meet would be like, how can we help? They're like, software developers, and there's this like hunger for software developers that was crazy. And so we were like, this doesn't make sense because in today's world, remote work is a lot more possible. Second of all, which means that people are going to be able to access talent outside of their city and be able to work with them. So you can work with people in your state, in the whole country, in your time zone, in the whole world. And the main challenges for that to actually work is you're going to be able to figure out how to find those people, right? I'm going to need to get a developer. I need to find, how do I find them if they're not not close to me? Second is I need to know how to screen them. Do I know they're good? Third is I'm going to need a way to match me to the person to make sure that I'm getting the right fit between our company and the other company. And the last piece is I need to know how I'm going to work with that company, right? How do I work in a remote environment? How do I manage remote teams? It's a whole different way of managing people. So if you can do those 4 things right, you can change the way companies build software. And this was like huge for us. We're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And we go tell people, they're like, dude, are you crazy? Like, there's no way this is going to work out. There's so many challenges. First, finding the talent. How are you going to screen the talent? The education systems around the world are completely different. The remote work is very hard to manage remote teams. How do I promote culture and propagate culture remotely? The matching process is going to be disastrous because how do you validate what people say and on what basis are you making matching? It's not going to work. And that's kind of the feedback we get, and they're like, Silver Lake is going to be well paid, you can guarantee the money, blah, 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 blah. And so that's kind of like, I was like, but like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do VenturePact. And they're like, you're crazy. And so then I was like, okay, I need to come up with a way to explain to people why I'm making the decision beyond me just talking about like why VenturePact seems very interesting to me, because to them it wasn't as interesting as it was to me. And it's just like a difference of perspective, right? So you kind of see the problem and you kind of get excited about it, but and you think your solution makes sense. To other people, they think that there's a low probability of that solution actually to work, which is probably true. I mean, there is a low probability of that to succeed. So I was like, okay, I am not optimizing my decision based on short-term cash flows. If I was optimizing my decision on the short-term cash I would make for the next 2-3 years, then it would make sense for me to go with Silver Lake, which, by the way, I had a great experience with. It was a great company. So there was nothing wrong with Silver Lake. I would have probably gone back if I didn't have VenturePact. But I was doing VenturePact, and I was like, what matters to me is to learn and to optimize my long-term learning, which means that if I do VenturePact, I'm going to learn a lot more. Just by working on part-time, I've learned so much about the law and accounting and finance and managing expectations and contracts and working with clients and building software that I would not have learned if I'm doing the standard job the standard job at Silver Lake. So I was like, that's the first thing. The second thing I did was I watched a video by Jeff Bezos, and he talks about regret minimization framework. He says that when you make a decision, instead of thinking about your decision now as someone looking today at the next step, think of your decision as an 80-year-old looking back at your life, and your goal is to minimize the regret that you would have as an 80-year-old looking back, right? So if I'm 80 years old and looking back at my decision, I would always regret not doing VenturePact. I would regret that. I'd be like, what would have happened if I did it? So if I was to minimize my regret, I would say, oh, I'm going to do VenturePact. And as an 80-year-old, you look back at your life and you realize that if VenturePact failed, probably the world would not end. I would figure out some way to get myself back on my feet. So you change the way you perceive risk by looking at that, by using that framework. And that's very interesting. And it kind of appealed to me because I realized that, if you look back today at when you were in high school and you looked at a test that you took, some test, just choose a test at random, and you would say like, oh, that actually was not that important. But if you think about that test from the perspective of yourself 1 hour before the exam, you are like going through your notebooks like, oh my God, this is so important, and like my life is going to depend on this test, and this is going to be like amazing, and then after the test, you mess up on a problem, and you're just like going crazy about it. I can't believe I messed up on that test. And now you look back and you're like, I don't even know what that test was. That didn't even matter, right? And so you change the way in which you perceive things by changing the time at which you look at things. And I think that is what we end up doing is we always overestimate the risk of the decisions we're making. We always think that what we're going to do in the next 2 years, if we do banking, right, and then we get to private equity, that's the way to go. Like, that's the structure. And it's not, I don't want to say that everyone should do startups, everyone should do technology. I just want to say that you should be more open to these decisions and opportunities that come, when they're available, as opposed to thinking that you just have to follow the standard route. And I know it's hard because You come into Wharton and you just see the lines of people outside these rooms in these suits, and you're like, what are you waiting in line for? They're like, oh, this bank is here. This consulting firm is here. You're like, oh my God, I gotta wait in line here. I'm not wearing a suit, and you wait in line and you go inside and they talk about, we travel in these jets with CEOs, and we talk to the CEO in person, and we learn about this company, and it's great. And but there is a lot. If you look at it from a learning standpoint, there is a big difference in learning and culture and environment. And so when you're making these decisions, I really think you should be thinking more about teams and how much you can learn than about what other people perceive of that role in that job. And so that takes me to the third thing I want to talk about, which is team. The team is the number one most important thing that you will hire, lead, work with in your life. So the most important thing is the team that you work with. So if someone comes up to me and is like, oh, I'm going to work at company X. They have 5,000 people. Am I going to have a good time? I was like, they have 5,000 people. I can't tell you whether or not you're going to have a good time. The basis of your decision is going to be on the people you work with, your boss and the teammates. If they love their job, if they're really smart people, you're going to learn from them, and no matter what you're doing, you're going to enjoy your time because they're enjoying their time. If you have a bad boss, even if it's an amazing company, if you're working at Google, you have one bad boss, and the teammates aren't loving it because they have a bad boss, you're not going to have a good time because your boss is going to disrespect you or give you like a lot of work that you're not going to have fun with, and the team is all trying to rush out of the office. This is a bad environment. You're not going to have a good time. The team is the number one most important thing that will ever happen. And in a startup, it's even more important because you're spending night and day with someone. You're always working. You have 1,000 roadblocks that you're coming across. And you want people who are going to keep pushing with you because the whole job is that you have to jump over these roadblocks, right? The startup will only fail for two reasons. One is you give up. Two is you run out of money, which means you give up on trying to raise money. So basically, it's giving up, which is basically a mental challenge of how do I not give up and how do I perceive risk, which is all about the team. And so if you have a good team, you're going to go across these challenges and you're going to keep fighting. And that's why team is super important. And culture keeps the team running, right? If you have a great culture, if there's a purpose for what you're doing, if you can stand there and say, every day we can talk to the team and we can tell them, look, this is an amazing vision. We can change the way companies can serve their customer through software. We can change the way companies can operate internally and optimize their internal operations through software by providing them with access to this amazing screening process and amazing matching process that we've built. We can tell them that, and they're like, okay, wow, now I know why I'm running. Now I know what I'm running towards, and now I know why we're working so hard. And that's going to help them motivate themselves. So don't underestimate the importance of the mental perception of these challenges, because that, at the end of the day, is what matters. Airbnb raised around at $10 billion, and they were growing very quickly, and Brian, the CEO, went to Peter Thiel, who was helping them run the round, and he's like, okay, so now we're growing, so we're going great. They had, in the World Cup, like over 300,000 people a night booking a room. It's a great business. What's your advice? He asked Peter Thiel, what's your advice? He's like, the hardest thing you're going to do is being able to maintain the culture. As the company scales, right, when you're first 10 people, it's like very easy for you to go up and talk about the vision, talk about why you're doing what you're doing, to motivate people. And it's easy for them to understand the culture of the company. After you move to 100 people, it becomes harder. You go to 1,000 people, you don't know everyone by first name, it's harder to maintain the culture. People, you might have bad bosses. You might have had one bad hire that's going to ruin the experience for that whole team under them, and that happens. It always happens. You can't guarantee great hires, especially when you're starting to hire thousands of people. And so maintaining the culture, Peter Thiel said, was the number one most important thing that Brian should be focused on. And it's true. And I'll give you a way to think about this. So in every industry, think of it like a maze. And your job as a startup or as a company is to figure out the best way to achieve the jackpot or the best route to get to where you want to go. The problem, though, is that in the maze you kind of end up going around these routes that seem promising, but they end up being dead ends. And you kind of got to go back to the beginning and keep fighting. You keep doing that until at some point you find a route that gets you to where you want to go. There's multiple routes that get you there, right? There's multiple companies that capture an industry that do things in different ways. The challenge, though, is that you have to go through that whole process for you to find that right spot. And to get to that right process takes persistence. It takes people who are dedicated to what they're doing. And to have persistence, you need to be motivated. And to be motivated, you need to have a great culture. You need to have a great team who's going to be willing to fight with you. And so the team is the most important thing. And I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to stop my speech there. And I want to open it up to questions. But I really wanted to say that team is very important. And I am reminded about this every single day. every single day on the job. Imagine how important it is for every day on the job for you to be reminded about that. I remember when I was a student, I would listen to speeches and people would come up and they'd be like, team communication culture are very important. Basically every single person would come up and say that. And I'd be like, yeah, obviously. And I'm hanging out with engineers and finance and statistics people and they're like, what is this guy talking about all this fluff management stuff and this is not important and like everything is about math and science and like this is being done right and management doesn't matter. Actually completely wrong. So much of what you do is the mental perception of how you do it, and how you perceive what you do. And so much about what you do is about loving the work that you do. If you're working with a team that loves what they do, you will love what you do, you'll have a good time. Team is important. Don't think of this stuff as fluff and soft stuff that doesn't really matter. It does. It does, because it changes the way your employees, it makes it so much easier for you to hire, retain talent, which is at the end of the day all that you're doing because you're training all these people. Okay, I'm going to open up the questions now. I tell a lot, so if you guys want like 10 seconds to like absorb and then ask questions. If not, I can keep talking for another 25 minutes. Yeah.
So, like you say, your team is really important to you, but how does that translate to the actions you take like, day to day?
Oh, very good question. Very good. So first is you need to have a really good hiring process for how you onboard the team. You want to make sure that they fit your culture. And this is especially important for the first 10 people that you hire. They're going to be the future managers of the business. They're going to be the future leaders of the business. So the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out what matters to what you're doing, right? So if you're hiring, first, what role are you hiring for? And second, so obviously you need someone who's talented and skilled. The second piece is you have to understand what are the values of your business and how you kind of think about how you think about the business from a high level, and will this person fit in with the values that you have? So for us, I'll give you an example. For VenturePact, what really matters is someone who is, first of all, easygoing. We can't have someone who's arrogant and obnoxious, and even if they're super smart and they're super talented, if they're not going to fit in. Second, if someone doesn't respect deadlines or you feel like they aren't diligent and they don't get stuff done, that's not going to work. You need someone who's going to be able to get stuff done and work hard. Like if you're not working hard, this is not going to work. Third is you want to be with someone who you feel like you're going to want to, like, you're working until 11 p.m., it's a Friday night, you're like, all right, let's go out for drinks and let's unwind. You want someone you're going to be like, I'm happy to go out with this person afterwards because he's probably going to crack jokes and we're going to have fun together. If you're like, oh man, I got to hang out with this guy and he's going to talk to me about, he's going to be very, negative, and that's not going to work. And then negativity is also very important for the work, at work. You go through like 1,000 different hurdles every day. Basically, whatever can go wrong will go wrong in business. So if you have someone who's negative and who's going to complain about them, it's not going to work. You want someone who's positive. Who's like, there was one time we went to Boston. We had to give a speech in Boston, and everything went wrong. We arrived like 2 hours late. The cab took us to the wrong hotel, which was an hour off from the other hotel. We had to go then to the other hotel. The conference forgot to book us the hotel, so then we had to get Conference forgot to book us hotel, so we went to another hotel. Then we had to go to the first hotel we went to, which was an hour drive, was the wrong one, and we had to go back another like an hour and a half down. So we ended up sleeping for an hour before we had to go up. Everything went wrong, and at the end we were like cracking jokes with the last cab driver that we took because we're like, this is actually so absurd that it's kind of funny. If there was someone else, they would have gone crazy, right? But we had that kind of like, all right, this is kind of funny. Like the amount of things that have gone wrong make it pretty amusing. So that's very important for team. And that's like a small piece of it. If someone has a specific question about how you think about culture and how you think about communication, I can go into those too, but that's kind of a quick answer. Yeah?
When you were making the decision between Silver Lake and VenturePact, what was the point at which you were certain that you wanted to do VenturePact? Because I heard a lot of stories about, that once you go to work and you're like 2 or 3 years into work, it's really hard to, get out of that area. So, like, at one point were you completely certain?
So deep down, I knew that there was a pull. It was just like, I felt whenever I was working on VenturePact, I was in a state of flow. Like I was just working, and I could keep working. And I just loved what I was doing because I realized like this is something that can possibly have legs and can grow. So there was a pull that was deep down as we started working on it, and especially when you start working with the first few customers. So when you start working with customers and you're dealing with all their challenges, you realize that can you serve them well? Can you really solve this problem? And we realized that Well, there was a lot of challenges to solving that problem, which was good because those hard problems to solve, right? That's like what you want to dedicate your time to. You want to dedicate your time to work on hard problems. But we also realized that the way in which you were thinking about it was interesting. And so I would say like maybe after our first 3 customers, we were pretty much at the point where we're like, all right, this is legitimate. And we kind of had that whole process from the beginning. We're like, let's just experiment with this thing. We had a 6-hour coffee chat, and we're like, let's just experiment with it. We're both super excited about it. And as we started experimenting with it, we realized that there's something there, but we also realized that there's a lot that we need to accomplish to get to where we want to be. And so that was the pull, like, oh, we can probably do this, or at least there's potential. Yeah.
So for a lot of us with organizations, finding a right team is just as important as a startup in many ways.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for both, identifying the best fits for our organization through interviews or what have you, but also avoiding, bringing on that person who could become toxic?
Oh, very good question. So the most important thing is to see if you're going to be like. So what I did was when I was working at Ambush, I spoke with each of the founders. When I was making the team, I spoke with each one of the founders, and we had a long conversation. And I was basically trying to see how do these people think, and I asked them a lot of questions about the challenges that they faced and how they came about addressing those challenges. And I realized that first, they were very genuine and honest. Second, they were extremely intelligent people. And third, they were some of the most amazing hustlers I have ever seen. And they were just like, we would figure stuff out. Like they maxed out, each one of them maxed out all their credit cards. They had their 3rd co-founder working in PE, dishing out 2/3 of his cash to them to fund the company that was like, and they had everything going wrong. They find this one guy, the amount of things they went through, they talked about these stories, and I was like, wow, these guys are committed. And like it's a different level of commitment. And even from the way they were speaking with me, I was like, okay, these guys, I can connect with them, and I think they're very intelligent people. At the least, I'm going to learn a lot. And I think a lot of the times, someone called me up, he's like, oh, I did consulting for 2 years, I'm offered to keep going, or I can work at the startup. The problem is the startup has risk. I was like, your startup just raised $20 million. You're probably going to spend, on average, 2 years at any company that you work at in today's world, right? You're not spending 40 years at a company as people used to do. So, guaranteed at 20 million, you're probably, the company's going to be around for 2 years. So you're going to, the whole time you're going to be there, it's going to be around. Second, I know the team, and they're amazing, right? They're not just because they're Penelons, but they're a great team, and they literally have a massive operation that he will run, right? They have like 5 core people, and they have an operation team of like 100. So you can be like number 5 of this, like, or number 6 of this company, and run their entire like their logistics arm, which is going to be an amazing experience. And even if it fails, they'll be around for 2 years, and you'll learn a lot. So that's how I think you make a decision. You make a decision by asking intelligent questions of the team and the management. And when you ask them smart questions, think about what matters. Like for me, it was learning, right? And it was seeing if I could get along with them. So you ask, like, how did you get started? Tell me about something you've done. And when you ask the team, you also learn a lot about the managers. The managers aren't going to say we're bad managers. The team people will indirectly say that. You ask someone from a team, I'll give you an example. So I asked someone from a team, I'm like, what is your experience working with this team? And they'll be like, yeah, so, and they'll be like, some of the managers are little, and they're basically trying to say that the manager is just going to give a ton of work. He always works, so he just keeps on giving work. His goal is, instead of doing 20% of the work to get you 80% of the way there, he wants you to keep working, make everything perfect, even though that additional amount of effort, which is 80% of the time, really doesn't move the needle on decision making. He's just all about perfection, and he's very, I don't know, but he's not a great boss. And so I got a really good insight from speaking with the employees in the team. And they kind of would say, like, if you're coming, you want to try not to be on this team. So you get advice from people, but it's all about talking to people. Talk to a lot of people, because like I'm giving you my advice, but that's coming from my perspective and my experience. You speak with like 10 other people, and they'll say 10 different things, and it's all a function of their experience. So at the end of the day, the more people you speak with, the more perspective you get, and it's all about learning. Like you don't want to just like say, this person said it, so I'm going to do that. It's more like, what do different people say, and now I can absorb that and think, how does that relate to myself? Because each person is very different. And so, for me, learning was the most important thing. For other people, it might not be. For other people, it might be something completely different. Yeah.
As the leader of a firm hiring, how do you project, like, what specifically do you try to project that will attract people? Like, it's one thing to weed out people after they're already there.
Yeah.
But like, what do you project? Like, what do you want them to see when they interview?
Yeah. Great question. So you speak a lot about the vision. Say, why are we around? What are we trying to accomplish? And so that is the main thing. So people will be like, I'll give you an example. So we were onboarding a salesperson, and they had a lot of great offers from big companies that were paying them a lot of cash. And they were like, this is a great opportunity, and we like what you're doing, but like this brand name is a lot bigger than VenturePact. We were like, yeah, obviously they're bigger. They're also been around for a lot longer, but let's think about your responsibility there. You're going to be first we talk about the role. So I'm like, you're going to be working on like a very specific point of the sales funnel, and like that's all you're going to be doing. There's going to be very limited flexibility for you to change anything, and after the first 2 months, it's going to be completely redundant. Now look at what you're going to be doing at VenturePact. You're going to run the entire sales funnel, right? You're going to be a potential to be a leader on the sales team. And you're working on helping us accomplish the vision of changing the way, B2B partnerships are conducted on a global basis, right? And we tell them, like, we can completely change the B2B services industry. And we can do that by, and we'll talk to them about what we've done. We'll talk to them about how many challenges we faced, about, there was a lot of stuff we went through in the last, 2.5 years. And we kind of tell them, like, this is what we had to do to understand these global development firms. Like, we had to go to, like, Sofia, Bulgaria, Bucharest, Romania, around the Middle East, like Western Europe, Eastern Europe, around India, the whole country, like, UK, around the US. Like, we traveled to all these places, we met all these companies, we learned about the way things work. We had to understand how to select and screen companies. Like, that wasn't easy. And they're like, oh wow, these people are first dedicated to what they're doing. Second, they are clearly passionate about what they're trying to accomplish. And if they agree with us and they think that the vision they think that you can really realize that vision, then they should jump on board. If they don't think that vision is interesting, it's probably better for them not to join you. Because they're not, when you're working every day and you're hustling, and they're going to be like, it's 5 p.m., like, I got things to do. And I learned a lot from the CTO of Box. You guys know Box, it's like Dropbox, but for business. And he was like, we hired a guy who's really smart, and we onboarded him. We're super excited about hiring him. Within the first month, the servers went down. He was in charge of the servers, and he was like, okay guys, 5 p.m., I gotta go. And he left, and the servers were running down. They're like, what's going on? And from that point, they were always skeptical. They kept him for 6 months before they let him go. And he was like, you always fire someone too late, and it's really important for them to connect with you. They're just like very focused on, if they don't care about the business, it's not gonna work. At a big company, that doesn't matter. You can do that, but at a small company, you can't.
When you're hiring somebody, how do you determine the marginal product of labor?
How do you determine the marginal product of labor?
Yeah.
You're saying like the value that they can provide, or the cost? How much you should pay them? That's a good question. So I would say the key point for us on deciding that is first, what is the market doing? So you say, okay, the market is, you can find that on Glassdoor or in general. Like, you can get a sense of the market. So if it's a salesperson with 3 years of experience, you get a sense of the market. Then you say, okay, if we're going to give them equity, how does that change the way the market works? And then if it's a sales position or if there's a base and commission, then you want to see what the preferences of the person is, right? So if the person is going to be like, no, like, I would rather have this type of model. Like, you see what their preferences are, right? If they're paying off student loans and they want a bit more cash and a bit less equity, then you'll structure it that way. So you understand where they're coming from and what matters to them. But it's a negotiation process, right? It's not like you're just saying, we're going to pay you, X $1,000, this bonus, this is how the commission works, this is how equity works. Usually, and we try to do like where we test things out. We're like, okay, let's try this thing out for 3 months. We'll see how commission works and salary works, and then over time we can like optimize the way we do the salary commission split. Especially when someone's selling to, like, if you're hiring a salesperson and they're selling to a new industry. So if you hire a salesperson, okay, you're going to focus on selling to companies that are building 3D printing, and companies leveraging software for 3D printing or data science, and that's a new industry. We don't know the percent success rates. We don't have like all this data around. Oh, on average, a good salesperson will sell this much. This is how much commission he's going to have on that. So if we give them 10% commission on sales, this is how much they'll end up making. we don't have that data, so we can't completely say that with certainty, especially when you're hiring someone to run a new industry. So that's why we kind of will say, like, for the first 2 months, we'll tweak it within these bounds, and then we'll know afterwards what we'll do. But you really kind of, it's first market, what's market rates, second, what matters to that person, and then you kind of come up with something in the middle.